Okay. Very good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Amateur Radio Technician class, session number 4. Yes, a very good evening to you, Norman. Good evening also, Mark and Linda, and also Nathaniel. Welcome. Good evening, everyone. So let's make a start. So during our previous session, we had a look at our curriculum progress. We had a look at the links to the practice exams again. We went through the question and answer session. We discussed what is electricity, the electric circuit and water analogy. We discussed voltage and current. We also discussed the direct current, alternating current, resistance, conductors and insulators, Ohm's law. We had an example of the calculations using Ohm's law, resistance, and question pool review. So our agenda for today, we will again have a look at where we are with respect to our curriculum. We will discuss again the links to the practice exams. We'll go through our question and answer from between last session and this session. And we'll look at the course material again. We have a couple of corrected slides from the previous session. And then some of the technical topics that we will delve into this evening will be positive and negative numbers, number bases. We will discuss what logarithms are. Then we move to talking about the decibel or decibels. We'll do some worked examples to illustrate decibel calculations. Then we will talk about a couple of components, resistors, as well as potentiometers. And then we will do our question pool review to look at the questions in the question pool related to the topics we would have covered this evening. And then, of course, we'll give the date of our next session. Okay, so in terms of our curriculum, we are starting to make good and steady progress. This evening, we will finish electrical principles and we will begin the next topic, which will be the electronic components and circuits. So each and every session we'll be encouraging persons to have a look at the practice exams. You don't have to wait until you are completed with the course to look at the exams, and that will give you an idea where you are. And many persons will find a surprise just how much information that you already know from prior knowledge. And we say congratulations to all of the students who have been successful at the various exams within recent times, whether it's the technician or general, and I think we even had one that did extra recently as well. So congrats to all. So one of the questions that we got asked last session was, where can I get radios from locally? So I did mention to you that we'll provide a follow-up answer. So we have one such dealer in Trinidad and Tobago that's called Caribel. They're located in San Fernando and they are an ICOM dealer. That's the brand of radio equipment. So that is one company locally that can supply amateur radio equipment that we can confirm. We also note that as a licensed ham, or once you get your amateur radio license, you have the option to apply to TAT, that's the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, to gain approval for radio communications equipment for import. That's a form that you fill out, and once you get that, you are able to import radio communications equipment yourself. All right, so again, just a reminder, all participants should have received the documents that's listed on your screen. And we are using the No Nonsense Technician Class License Study Guide by KB6NU, Kilo Bravo 6 November Uniform. That's the book that we are using. So if anyone has not received these books or this material, please send an email or WhatsApp and we will rectify. So let's talk a bit about a couple of corrected slides. So every now and again, we do have errata and we do try to address them at the beginning of each session. So we had a small error on the slide during the last session here where we incorrectly had an R. So it's corrected. The correct symbol is I. So in your slide deck from the last class, we would have already corrected it. However, during the session itself last week, there was an error. So just pointing out the error, an I instead of an R in the denominator of the last equation. Okay. Also, another error that was made when we were looking at the magnitude prefixes. The abbreviation for nano is the letter N, as in lowercase n or small n. I think we incorrectly had the word none inside of there, so that was also corrected. And I also took the opportunity to add a de memoire. Many persons have said, how do I remember? Someone asked actually, do we get these tables in the exam? And the answer is no. So how do we remember these, right? To go from the base units up in magnitude or from the base unit down, to go from meter to kilometer and so on, or to go from meter to millimeter to micrometer and so on, right? How do we remember that? Well, one of the ways that you can help yourself in an exam is as soon as you get into the exam, write down on a blank sheet of paper, right? The prefixes, so that when you're in the middle of the exam, you wouldn't have to try to remember then. So that's one technique. And there's a little aid in memoir. If you want to use it, you can consider it. So if you look at it, you have giga, mega, kilo. We have the base unit, then milli, micro, nano, pico. But if you look at the first letter of each of these, and you think of the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G for giga, H, well, we don't have M coming in, but we think of there's a mega million inside of there. So this is a little anomaly, but you have G, no H, no I, no K, no J. You have K for kilo. There's no L. There's an M for milli, and there's another M, so double M for micro, and then N for nano. There's no O on a P, right? So you could probably try to use something like this if you need that aide de memoire as to how to remember the order. So this is just a suggested way that you might be able to, if you're having any difficulty remembering from the base unit, you go up kilo, mega, giga, and then you go down milli, micro, nano, pico. You can look at A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, right? And see if this alignment makes sense for you. So you have an anomaly here, mega, so you can think of it as a mega million, right, after the G for giga. And then you have two M's here, which is milli and micro, right? So milli is the bigger one, micro is the smaller one, right? So think of microscopic as being smaller than milli, right? So hopefully that is of a help for persons who may have a challenge in remembering the prefixes and the order. And of course, once you get them listed, the multiplier or the division is 1000 between each of these rows in the table. So you will not have this table available to you in the exam, so you'll have to remember this order. And if you have any challenges, hopefully this will help. Let's go to another slide that we have added for additional clarity. So this is just to improve a little bit on the previous slide, make it a little simpler. Right, so the previous slide has a lot of additional information for you as a reference point. But you do not certainly need to learn all of these things that are listed here. It just may help you conceptualize the differences. So what you need to know is the prefix, the abbreviation, and of course the multiplier between them. But we have given you a numerical representation, an exponential representation, and examples, and of course multiply up or down. But here's a simpler version of that table that might help some persons, again, conceptualize. So we have the A de memoire on the right-hand side, the letters of the alphabet, G all the way to P. Hopefully that will be a way to remember. However, there's a simple way to represent the multiply by 1,000 as you go down, so that you can see if you have to go from giga to kilo, you actually multiply by 1,000 and also multiply by 1,000 again. And of course, if you're going up, meaning that you are going from the base unit to kilo, for example, you need to divide by 1,000. If you're going from kilo to mega, you divide by 1,000. So that's what this representation is here. And hopefully that will be helpful to some persons. All right, so let's talk a couple of concepts here that's important in us going forward. So we did say there's no big set of mathematics in this course, but there's some basic mathematics that's required, and we need to, from time to time, just introduce a couple of the concepts or remind ourselves of a couple of these concepts. So when we get into the calculations, it will, be a little bit easier on us. All right, so all of us are familiar, surely, with numbers. We know numbers. We use numbers in every day in our daily lives, whether we are changing a channel on television or we are using money to pay for something. We use numbers, right? If we are driving a car and we are looking at the speedometer, we use numbers all the time. So we need to be aware that when it comes to numbers, this is a number line on your screen, and 0 is the number. So we're starting at 0 as the middle of our number line, and we're moving in the upward direction or the positive direction or the increasing direction. So after 0, the next whole number is 1, the next whole number is 2, and 3, and 4, and so on. So that's numbers in a positive direction. We also need to be aware that this number line also goes in the negative direction. So 0, right? We go in the opposite direction. We go to -1 or -1, -2, -3, -4. So this is the number line, and we just need to be aware of positive numbers and negative numbers. When you go to the right, you are increasing in the number or the value. So 1, 2, 3, of course, 3 is more than 2, 2 is more than 1, 4 is more than all of them, and so on this number line. In the same way on the negative side, that is also true. So for example, -1 is a larger number than -2. -2 is a larger number than -3, and so on. So as you go to the left, you are decreasing or getting less. And as you go to the right, you are getting more. So 0 is more than -1 or -1. -1 is more than -2, right? So we can say -2, -2 to mean the same thing. So just be aware of negative numbers and positive numbers, because you'll be seeing them in some of the formulae that we deal with in a little while. So one way that we probably are sure to have seen those positive and negative numbers is in temperatures. So for example, you'll hear in the US it's -20 degrees Fahrenheit or minus something Fahrenheit, or in your refrigerator minus something Fahrenheit. So negative numbers should not be completely a stranger to us. And of course, we are familiar with positive numbers. So think of temperatures when you're thinking of numbers and positive and negative numbers. We also need to be aware of the concept of number bases. So we're not going to get in depth into it other than to introduce and just mention that we have numbers that are of different base types or bases. So the normal numbering system that we are most likely accustomed to is called the decimal system. And the decimal system has a base of 10. So we will count, let's say we start with 0, and then go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Of course, we know it's written as 0, 1, 0, 2. Don't worry too much about that. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All the way, we go 8, 9, 10. And then we go 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So we need to be aware that we are using the decimal system, which is base 10. So we don't have to learn anything on the right-hand side here, but just for reference and for additional information, we also always like to give something extra in the class. We also have the binary number system, the octal, and the hexadecimal system, also called hex. So this is just for reference on the right-hand side, but we just need to be aware that the usual numbers that we use and count with every day is to base 10 as opposed to binary, which is base 2, octal, which is base 8, hexadecimal is base 16. Again, we will not get into this in the class, but just be aware that our decimal numbering system that we use every day uses base 10. All right. So one more definition that we need to just make participants aware of. And again, this is not something that you have to learn. You're not going to get this in the exam, but this is, again, hopefully to aid in understanding when we come to some formulae in a little bit as to what these things are about. So we just want to introduce the concept of logarithms, or logs for short. And we have here, it says that a logarithm tells us the power to which a given number or base number must be raised to get to another number. So this is talking about exponents, or a number raising to the power of another. So again, this is not on your exam, but this is just to help us understand. So for instance, if we have a number b and we raise it to the power of L, it gives us y. So this is how we are representing it here. Some number b to a power gives us y. We'll see in a little while. This should be clarified. But it also tells us that the logarithm of this same y that we get here to the base b is equal to L. So again, this is not something necessary to learn. It's just for reference and our awareness. But just be aware, we'll be dealing with something called logs or logarithms, and the abbreviation for logarithm is log. And you'll see in a little while this notation coming up. So hopefully it will not be too confusing to understand what we're talking about. So let's go straight into it. All right. So let's give an example of what logarithms might look like for the mathematics that we need to do. So again, this is not something you need to learn for. You're not going to get tested on this on the exam, but just to give a little idea, when we talk about log this or log of a number, some person might be wondering, what's this log about? So let's just give an example so that hopefully we can see where logs come in or in reference to numbers. So if, for example, we take a number which is 100, and we did say a little earlier that in our decimal numbering system that we use base 10. If we were to take the log of 100 to base 10, we get 2. Let us try to understand why we get 2. So we have the equation at the bottom here. The log to base 10 of 100 is equal to 2. That is how we read this equation here. So log is an operation, so we do the logarithm of 100, but we're taking log to base 10. So sometimes people may omit the base. They may not put 10 here, but the reason we are putting 10 here is because there's also other types of logarithms. There's natural logs, ln, right, which is to what we call base e, right? So we just like to put here that it's logarithm that we're taking, but to base 10. That's what this notation means. We could have easily left out this 10 here and just put log of 10. Sorry, log of 100 and leave out the 10. But we just know that it's to base 10. So the log of 100 is equal to 2. Let's see how we get that. So if we're familiar with exponents of powers, if we look up here in the equation above, you'll see 10. And this is not 10 multiplied by 2. This is 10 to the power of 2, or 10 squared, which is 10 multiplied by itself, 10 by 10, which is 100. So these two equations here are related in the sense that you have the number 100. We have it in both equations. We have the power, in this case it's the power 2, but we're saying here that in the next equation, the logarithm is 2. And then of course we have the base 10, which is 10 here, but it shows up in the base 10 when we're taking logs. So hopefully we have not confused anyone. It just gives a little idea as to what logs are about. You can look this over on your own time. This is not on the exam, But when we're talking about logs, I just thought we should give a little introduction as to where these things called logs come from, how they relate to one another, and this is just for your information. Right. So now we come a bit to what we need to know about as amateur radio operators and for our course. We need to discuss the decibel. What is the decibel? So, first of all, decibel is abbreviated as dB, small d, large B, and we need to become very familiar with this term called the decibel. The reason is because as amateur radio operators, we are always talking about power, as in transmitter power. Some of us who are into music will know, you have a music system with a lot of power. You may have 100 watts, 200 watts, 1,000 watts. That's power. In the same way as amateur radio operators, we also have transmitters that emit power. And oftentimes, we will be using the decibel term to reference ratios of these powers. So we need to be familiar with decibel. And where it is used is sometimes we need to compare one power versus the next. So for example, if we're comparing two persons in height, we may say one person is 4 feet high or 2 meters high or 1.5 meters tall, or compare it to another person that may be a little bit taller. So we do comparisons all the time. So in power, we also do a similar comparison. So if you remember last class, we talked about the calculation. How do we get power? Remember, P is equal to IE. So we are always calculating power as amateur radio operators, but sometimes we need to compare power. So if I have an initial power and I have another power, I may want to find out, well, what's the ratio between those two powers? And we use decibel. The reason we use decibel is because it allows us to compare powers using, or power using relatively small numbers. And that will become a little clearer as we work through the examples in a little bit. So hold that thought for now. So let's look at this diagram here. On the bottom left, we have a representation of a radio or a transceiver or a transmitter. So as hams, we will be using radio equipment, and this is an example of a base or mobile radio or transceiver. And there's a microphone in it, and when we press the microphone, this radio will transmit radio frequency power. So we are saying here in this diagram that this radio is transmitting 1 watt of power. So remember we said the units of power is the watt. So we are transmitting 1 watt of power into this other device here that's called an amplifier. And what an amplifier will do is that it will take the input, process it, and have an output that is higher than what went in. So that's why we call it an amplifier, because the amplifier amplifies. So we have 1 watt going in, and we are saying that this amplifier has the ability to transmit 100 watts of power out. So what that means is that it is amplifying our radio signal that is leaving this radio, coming in at 1 watt into the amplifier and leaving at 100 watts, going to the antenna via the feed line. So this is a typical radio setup, a very basic, simple representation as hams, how we have our station set up. Radio, we may have an amplifier, and we may have an antenna, for example. There are other missing items in here, such as a power supply and other things. However, for the discussion of decibel, we would like to illustrate the idea that you may have one power coming in and another power going out. And we may want to represent the ratio of that power. So of course, if we say 1 watt is going in and 100 watts are going out, we can immediately tell, well, wait, that's 100 times the amount of power that's coming out versus what went in. We can say that 100 watts is 100 times 1 watt. We know that. However, as hams, to describe that relationship where 1 watt is going in and 100 watts is going out, we use the decibel. And we will see that there's a 20 decibel or 20 dB gain in that signal, in that 1 watt is going in, 100 watts are going out. How did we get that 20? Well, we will see the calculation in a little while, but notice that it's 100 times increase in power, but we are saying it's a 20 dB gain. So remember I said a little bit earlier, it allows us to compare ratios of powers or large ratios using small numbers. So even though it's a 100 times increase in power, look at the value we're saying. It's only a 20 dB gain, or the number that we're using is a smaller number, 20 dB. So as we go through, we have several examples. As a matter of fact, most of this class will be working out some examples for decibel. Just because we want everyone to understand the concept of the decibel, we have several examples. And hopefully, by the time we go through a couple of these examples, we will get the gist of what we mean by what a decibel is, what a ratio is to express one power level versus the other. Okay, so you don't need to learn this slide for the exam either. However, we like to give extra information. And when we are calculating decibels, that's what we're going to be trying to do here. For the exam, you just need to learn some of the ratios and the dBs that relate to it, but we would like everyone to hopefully understand how we get those numbers. How do we get from 1 watt to 100 watts being 20 dBs? Do we not want to know? All right, so this is the formula on your screen for decibel calculation. So the decibel calculation is equal to the number 10, that's a fixed number or constant, 10 multiplied by the log. Now remember, we said we'll be using log with a small 10 here to mean the log or the logarithm using base 10. So they're all base 10 numbers of power number 2, which is the output power, over power number 1, which is the input power. So to calculate decibel, you multiply 10 by the log of the two powers, right? So remember, P1 is the input power, P2 is the output power. So P2 is put on the numerator and P1 is put on the denominator. So what you do is you divide these two powers, and whatever you get there, you take the log of it. How do we take the log of it? We use a scientific calculator is one way. And you will simply type in this calculation, P1 over P2, whatever. So in our example, we used 100 over 1, so which is 100. And we take the log of it by pressing the log button. And notice it's log that we use as opposed to ln, because ln is also logs, but these are natural logs. So we are using log to base 10. So when we're taking the log of a number, you type the number in, or you do the calculation that ends up, let's say P1 over P2. Then you press log and it will give you the answer for what the log is. So notice here I did a log of 10, and a log of 10 is 1. So what I did, I punched in 10 on the calculator, and then I pressed log, and it gave me the answer of 1. So we'll be using calculators to work out logs if we need to. So let's do this example, and after this example we will take a short break, and then we'll come back with many more examples of decibel calculation. So remember, in our little example here with the radio, we said that we had 1 watt leaving the transmitter or the radio transceiver and going into the amplifier with 100 watts coming out. 1 watt in, 100 watts out. But we said that was a 20 dB gain. So we are going to do the calculation to see how we got with a 1 watt in, the input power, and 100 watts out, the output power, how we got or reached or arrived at the conclusion that that's a 20 dB gain. Let's see. Okay, so the input power is 1 watt, that's P1. The output power is 100 watts, that's P2. So remember we said 1 watt into the amplifier, 100 watts out of the amplifier. And we had said that's a 20 dB gain. Let's see how we calculate that. So from going from 1 watt to 100 watts, we know that the power has increased 100 times. But we want to express that in terms of decibel. As hams, we use decibel or dB in our lingo and our language. So we are here to understand, how do we express 100 times increase as decibels, and how do we get 20 dB? Right, so remember we said the formula for dB or decibel is equal to 10 multiplied by the logarithm of the ratio of the two powers. So we take the powers and replace in this, the power levels, and replace into this equation here. So P2 is 100 watts, that's the output power, and P1 is the input power, which is 1 watt. So we end up substituting into P2, 100, and into P1, the number 1. So 100 over 1 is 100. And when I take the log using my calculator of 100, and that's the little side note here, the log of 100 is 2. So if you have a calculator, just punch in the number 100 and press the button that says log, and you will see it will give you the answer of 2. So that's how we got this 2 here. When we take the log of 100, we get 2. So of course, running the equation, we have 10 multiplied by the log of 100. So that's 10 multiplied by 2. And of course, 2 multiplied by 10 or 10 multiplied by 2 is 20. 20 dB. So this is just to give you an idea as to how the dB or decibel calculation is done. Again, you do not need to know this per se for the exam, but understanding how we arrive at it is very helpful for us to understand the calculation. So let's do it the other way. Just to, again, we are trying to illustrate concepts here. And after this slide, I promise you we'll take a break. So going the other way, what if the input power was 100 watts and the output power was 1 watt? Well, you will say, but that's a decrease in power. Yes, you'll be quite correct. Instead of amplifying, we are now attenuating the power, or we are reducing the power. So we are going in with 100, but we're coming out with 1 watt. That doesn't sound like a good deal, does it? But let's go with the example. So this is a power reduction. We are actually ending up with 1/100th of what we put in. So let's describe that in terms of decibel to show what the power loss is, or the negative gain, I should say. So let's go. So P1, which is the input power, is 100 watts, and P2, which is the output power, is 1 watt. So let's plug that into our trusty dB or decibel formula. Remember we said the formula for decibel is equal to 10 multiplied by, we take the log of P2 over P1. We know what P2 and P1 are. So P2 is 1 watt. So we put 1 in the numerator. And we know what P1 is. P1 is 100 watt. 100 watts. So we'll correct that for the next slide. It's 100 watts and 1 watt. All right. So we end up with 1 over 100 here. We simply substitute P1 and P2 into the equation. So continuing, we have the decibel is equal to 10 multiplied by the log of 1 over 100. Now 1 over 100 is 0.01. And if we put that into the calculator and we take the log of that, we will get the answer of -2 or -2. Remember we talked about the number line and why positive and negative numbers are important to our conversation. So we take the log of 1 over 100 and we get -2. So that's how we are able to come down to the next line in the equation. dB is equal to 10 multiplied by, we took the log of 1 over 100, which is -2. So of course, I'm not putting in the brackets. I should put in the brackets here to show it's a -2 and it's not, or it's a -2 and not 10. It's not a minus here as in a subtraction, right? So this is a -2 number. So in a way, I should have put in the brackets there, but I'm omitting them for a little more clarity. Hopefully no one will be too offended by that. So 10 multiplied by -2. When you multiply 10 by -2, you get -20 or negative, or some will say -20, right? So -20, that is how we show a power reduction. We go from 100 watts to 1 watt. It's a 100th of the power you're ending up with, but we are saying we have a loss and we say it's -20 dB. So if we were to compare and contrast that to the previous example where we had a power increase, we went 100 times up in power and we saw that that was 20 dB, as in positive 20 dB or plus 20 dB, right? We leave out the plus sign or the positive sign. But if we have a power reduction, we go instead of 1 to 100 watts, we go from 100 watt to 1 watt. We see that we have a -20 or -20 dB is the answer. So I promise you several more calculations that hopefully with the pattern, it might make things come together a little more. So let's take a little break, a little bathroom break, get up, take a stretch, drink some water, and we'll be back in 2 minutes. Okay, everyone. Um, so let me just see if I could address some of the questions. All right. So Bernard, okay, I see you got the audio back. So great. Amsterdam, good evening to you as well. Um, okay, great. Nicholas, yes, you're correct. PBS Technologies is also one of the radio communications companies in Trinidad and Tobago. Um, Certainly, they supply commercial gear. I'm not 100% sure that they have supplied any amateur radio gear, um, or I should say recently, right? But you're quite correct, they are another radio company. Okay, Junior, we'll get you the slide deck. Just let me know which one you're missing. Okay, so Lundy, you gave us a very nice I guess, goalkeepers like making maximum new points. Okay, that's excellent indeed. Yeah, goalkeepers like making maximum new points. Wonderful, Lundy. Thanks very much. And Samuel, good evening to you as well. Okay, so you said you tried the formula using Lundy. You tried the formula on your phone and it worked. Excellent. Yes, many phones do have a scientific calculator on them. Great. Yeah, so very basic, just logs, Charlie. Um, yeah, you will need logs, right? So that's why we say a basic scientific calculator. It doesn't would not be a graphing calculator, but just the basic scientific. Quite correct. Yeah. Okay, so Edward, I will get you the links to the previous recordings, so no problem. Yeah, Charlie. So back in the day, so I stopped short of saying that. So one way to do logs is, of course, to use a calculator. You could, of course, use um, a browser and use an online calculator. But back in the day, logbooks were a thing, right? Tables. So excellent indeed. So Evan, yes, we use Zello. I think during the first session, we did introduce, so I'll probably put it up again as one of the running slides just to remind everyone. So yes, there's a channel on Zello called React Members, which you're welcome to join. It's an open channel and we have nets on a Saturday night and also a Monday night at 9 p.m. So I'll put that up in a subsequent session. Good question there, Evan. All right, so Junior noted, we'll arrange to send off the slide deck. So we'll probably do a catch-all for everyone and just resend all the material to all participants. Hopefully that wouldn't cause an issue. All right, so we'll do. Okay, so I think that's it for Q&A live. Let's see if we could go back to where we left off. So I think this is where we are at. So we'll be doing several examples of DB calculation. Again, not absolutely necessary that you know the calculation, but I just think it's very helpful for us to understand how these things are calculated rather than only memorizing, right? But it will be sufficient to memorize the couple of questions that you will see in the question pool in a little while. But we do like to explain how we got to this point. How do we get to the actual numbers, right? And if you intend to continue on to the general and the extra class, this knowledge is going to be good foundational information for you as well. All right, so we are spending a bit of time here. So let's look at another example. Remember we said that we use decibels to compare large numbers using small numbers or ratios using small numbers. Well, look at this here. Imagine we had an input power into an amplifier of 1 watt and the output power of that amplifier is 1 million watts. That's a million times. That's a huge increase in power. 1 watt to a million watts. But we can express that in decibels and say that is a 60 dB gain. So you may be saying to yourself, wow, it's 1 watt to a million watts, a million times. But when we use dB, it's only 60 or 60. Yes. So remember we said that the decibel is a logarithmic function. We said that we can use it to express large ratios using small numbers. So hopefully you're starting to see it. Imagine 1 watt to 1000 watt, it's 60 dB. When we did 1 watt to 100 watts, that's a 20 dB. So you're not expecting if we go from 1 watt to a million watts to be only 60 dB. Yeah. So hopefully you're starting to get the picture of using the dB to express large number ratios. Okay. So let's do this calculation quickly here and we'll do the reverse. So the power output is of course 1 million times. But when we want to describe it or express it in terms of decibel, let's use our trusty decibel formula. Decibel is equal to 10 multiplied by the logarithm of P2 over P1. We know what P2 is, we know what P1 is. P2 is the output power, which is 1 million. So we put 1 million in the numerator. P1 is 1 watt. So we put 1 in the denominator. So that's 1 million over 1. That's this term here. Again, I could have also put that in brackets for some of those who are looking on and saying, well, why isn't Robbie putting some of these? I'm trying to just keep it simple and not have too much notation. There's a lot of notation here already. So hopefully this is not worse than putting it in, right? So we get the next line in the equation is dB is equal to 10 multiplied by log, again base 10, 1 million over 1. So we have to solve for the log of 1 million. 1 million over 1 is 1 million. And we have a little note here that the log of 1 million is 6. So again, those of you who tried it, you can put it into a calculator, type 1 million, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 6 zeros, and then press the log function and see if you do not get 6, right? So when we get that 6, we replace it into the equation here. So we get dB is equal to 10 multiplied by what the log of 1 million was, 6. And 10 multiplied by 6 is 60 or 60. So this is how we can see that a power increase of 1,000,000 times from 1 watt to 1 million watts is 60 dB. So let's do the reverse. And again, we're just trying to build a pattern here for us to understand the concept of the dB. Yeah? So if we have an input power of 1 million watts and we have an output power of 1 watt, wow, that's a huge loss there. There's some serious attenuation going on. Imagine we coming in with 1 million watts, but we have a little drip at the end, 1 watt remaining of power, so that doesn't sound good at all, right? But nonetheless, let's see what we can do to describe. So we know that we're ending up with 1 millionth of the power that we started off with. We know that, right? We go from 1 million to 1 watt. That's a millionth. However, we can describe that in terms of dBs, and you're probably starting to see why hams and people in radio use decibels to compare power ratios, right? All right, so let's stick these numbers into our trusty decibel formula. dB is equal to 10 multiplied by the logarithm of power 2 over power 1, or output power over input power. P2 is the output power, so that's 1 watt. Again, sorry about that. I have to change the, it's 1 million watts and 1 watt, right? Okay, that's what happens with copy and paste. All right, so we know P2 as 1 watt, and P1 is 1 million watts. So we put that in the numerator and denominator respectively. So we end up with P2 is 1, P1 is a million, so we end up with 1 over a million. Now 1 over a million is 0.000001. And if we were to type this number into our calculator or divide 1 by a million, we'll get this number. And we press the log button, you should get -6, or some will say -6, right? So we put that into our formula because the log of 1 over 1 million is -6 or -6. So we say dB is equal to 10 multiplied by -6. Again, forgive me for not putting brackets around the -6, right? And dB, therefore, 10 multiplied by -6 is -60. -60. So notice that a million times we have a 60 dB gain. And if it's 1 millionth, it's -60. So hopefully you're starting to get a pattern here. So let's actually get into some examples that's related to questions in our question pool. So these now that we're talking about here are what you will get in the exam, right? So again, you don't need to learn this calculation, but we find it very helpful if we know how to calculate it rather than just memorize the answer, right? So this is an actual question in the question pool. Which decibel value most closely represents a power increase from 5 watts to 10 watts? So we have dissected this question here for us. They're asking us for a decibel value. So we know we need the answer in something dB, right? So we know the form of the answer, but what have they given us? They said it's a power increase. And they say it's going from 5 watts. So 5 watts, of course, is the input power. And 10 watts is the output power. So we have P1 and P2, do we not? And we use our trusty log formula. Now, notice here, in going from 5 watts to 10 watts, we should be able to figure out that we are doubling the power. From going from 5 to 10, we have double the power. 5 multiplied by 2 is 10. So we have double the power going from 5 watts to 10 watts. So the power gets doubled. But we want to describe that in terms of decibel to illustrate the ratio of the powers. We don't want to just say twice times power. We want to say what's the gain in terms of decibels. That's what we do as amateur radio operators. So we use our trusty formula. dB is equal to 10 multiplied by the logarithm of the output power over the input power. So dB is equal to 10 multiplied by the log of, what is our output power? 10 watts. What is our input power? 5 watts. So we just simply substitute the numerator and denominators here, and we get 10 multiplied by the log of 10 over 5. So we know that 10 over 5 is 2. So what we need to do is find the log of 2, and that's what we have here on the right-hand side. We say 10 over 5 is 2, right? So we take the log, or we put 2 into the calculator and then press the log button, and we get approximately 0.301. Now that's why also in the question they say most closely represents, because if you were to look at your calculator, you will see some digits after the one here, right? See 0.301. You can convince yourself of that. Stick it into the calculator. But we are using the 3 decimal places here for our purpose, right? So that's the log, right? But when we multiply that by 10, we get approximately 3. So we will say that the answer is 3 dB. So that's the answer, and this is what you must learn for the exam. They will give you this exact question, and the answer is 3. What is the decimal value for a power increase from 5 watts to 10 watts? The answer is 3 dB. But you see here how we get the 3 dB. And I think that is kind of important for us to learn and understand. Not just to memorize the answer is 3, but to hopefully understand a little better to the calculation that went into determining that. So we have a power increase from 5 watts to 10 watts, which is twice times the power, but it's a 3 dB increase, or we can say that we have a gain of 3 dBs. All right, let's do the next question that you will get in the exam or in the question pool. Similar question. Which decibel value most closely represents a power decrease from 12 watts to 3 watts? So we have dissected this question. What are they asking us? Which decibel value? So we know the answer must be in decibels or dB. So we need a dB formula. All of that is in that piece of the question here. But what have they given us? They say our power decrease, okay? But from what? From 12 watts to 3 watts. Now we could do a quick mental calculation. Say, but wait a minute. If my input power is 12 watts and my output power is 3 watts, I reduce the power by a quarter, right? So you can figure that out by just looking at it. But I don't want to just know it's a quarter the power. I want to know what is my loss in terms of dB, right? So I need to use my trusty decibel formula. So the input power is 12 watts, and we're ending up with an output power of 3 watts. So that's a power reduction. The power is actually a quarter we're ending up with. But we want to calculate dBs. So we use our trusty formula. dB is equal to 10 multiplied by the log of the output power over the input power. What is our output power and input power? Well, 3 and 12 respectively. So we substitute into the equation those numbers. That's how we get 3 over 12. 3 is the output power, 12 is the input power. And of course, this next equation, dB is equal to 10 multiplied by the log of this number 3 over 12. 3 over 12 is a quarter, or 0.25. So you put that into a calculator and you press the log button, and you will end up with approximately negative 0.601, right? So notice here, if you actually look at your calculator, you will see some digits after. But again, that's also a gauge here. Notice in the question, they tell you most closely represents. So therefore, we're talking about approximating values, right? Right, so back to our equation. When we do the log of 3 over 12, we get negative 0.601. Again, apologies for not putting in the bracket, right? This is 10 multiplied by negative 0.601. When we multiply that out, we get approximately 6. Not just 6, because it's negative 0.601, we end up with negative 6 as the answer. So it's negative 6 dB is the answer to this question. Okay. Another question in the exam, very similar. Which decibel value represents a power increase from 20 watts to 200 watts? So let's dissect this question. What are they asking us for? They are asking us for a decibel value. So we know the answer is in decibels, or dB is equal to something, right? So we're looking for decibel. So that already tells us we need to use our trusty decibel formula. And we have a power increase. It's going from 20 watts to 200 watts. So you just examining that, but in mental calculation, you say, but wait a minute, going from 20 watts to 200 watts, that is sounding like increasing the power by 10 times. And you're quite correct. But we will see an interesting thing here when we come to the decibel calculation, right? Notice in the previous calculations, when we went from 5 watts to 10 watts, which is a doubling or twice the power, the dB was 3, yeah? The dB wasn't 2, all right? So notice that. All right, so let's come back to this question. We're going from 20 watts to 200 watts, power increase. So that means our input power is 20 watts, that's P1. Our output power is 200 watts, which is P2. So we use our trusty decibel formula. dB is equal to 10 multiplied by the logarithm of P2 over P1. What is P2? P2 is the output power, which is 200 watts. P1 is the input power, which is 20 watts. So we substitute that into the formula, and we end up with dB is equal to 10 multiplied by the log of 200 divided by 20. So of course we have a side note here. 200 divided by 20 is equal to 10. And if we were to punch into our calculator the number 10 and press log, we should get the answer 1. So that's why when we take the log of 200 over 20 or the log of 10, we substitute this now into the formula to say the log of 10 is 1. So we have dB is equal to 10 multiplied by 1. All of this here becomes 1. So 10 multiplied by 1, of course, is 10. Now it is a bit coincident. Well, it is seemingly coincidental that the increase of a power 10 times results in a dB of 10 or gain of 10, but it doesn't work with the other numbers. So we saw that when we increased the power from 5 watts to 10 watts, it's twice times, but the dB is 3. So don't go thinking that it's 4 times the power and it's going to be a dB of 4 and so on, right? That happens when it's 10 times, right? But always bear in mind that this is on the basis of this formula that we have here, which is our log formula for power. So this is the power logarithm formula. So just to make it nice, we have a little comparison. Again, these are the 3 questions summarized that you will get in the exam, right? So just side by side, we are showing the calculations, for the various power levels and the increase and decrease. Again, you don't have to memorize or learn any of this, but some persons may like the idea of you have a side-by-side comparison of the 3 calculations. So you're seeing what is changing and how the calculation is going line by line. So just some little notes here. You see, so one of the questions ends up in 3 dB as the answer. The other one ends up as -6 or -6 dB, and the other one as 10 dB. All right, so this is just a little reference. And also another reference that might be helpful. So the ones I've circled in red here are actually the ones that you need to learn for the exams because you get them in the questions. However, we have just shown here a couple extra as well, just for a reference point, to show that, okay, if it is negative or if it is positive, these tables here should help us a little bit to understand. So for a -6 dB, it's a quarter of the power, right? For a positive 6 dB, it's 4 times the power. That's what this table is telling us. For a -3 dB, it's half the power. But for a positive 3 or just simply 3 dB, it's twice times the power. And let's go with 10 as well. So a -10 or -10 dB represents 1/10 the power, or multiplying by 1 over 10. But 10 dB gain or 10 dBs is multiplied by 10. So hopefully you can get a sense of a pattern by just looking at this. Again, you don't need to learn all of this. This hopefully will just help us conceptualize and reference in us understanding this whole question of dBs and decibels. So I did tell you we will begin the next topic of electronic components. And we will only deal with one slide today. Next week, we'll of course get full into the electronic components. So we have just completed the first section, electrical principles, and we'll do one slide to wrap up our theory. And then after, we'll go quickly into the question pool questions. There are not many questions at all. We did all of this just to try try to understand some of these concepts. So when we see a question, we're not just learning the answer to it, but maybe we have an understanding as to why the right answer is the right answer. So, electronic components, resistors, and potentiometers. So, we did discuss in our previous session Ohm's law, and we talked about resistance, and we talked about current, and we talked about voltages. And we said in a circuit, an electric circuit, there can be resistance to the flow of the electrons. And sometimes we may want to put a component to resist that current flow. And that electrical component that actually resists or opposes the flow of current is called a resistor. So this is on your screen what a resistor might look like. It's not the only way it might look on a circuit board or in a circuit, but it's one of the ways it will look. There are different form factors and packages that a resistor will look like, but notice these little stripes. This actually tells you the values, and these are the leads, the two ends of the resistor. So this is a resistor. And also, just so that you know, this is the symbol for a resistor in a circuit. So what you need to know for the exam is that the electrical component that opposes the flow of current in a circuit is called a resistor. And just for extra information, the higher the resistance, according to Ohm's law, the lower the current will be. Right? So we have Mr. Ohm, Mr. Volt, and Mr. Amp inside of here as a previous graphic to help us understand the relationship between resistance, current, and voltage or electromotive force. There is a relationship, and it's called Ohm's law. But for the exam, we need to know what a resistor is. We also need to know another component that's related to the resistor. It's a kind of resistor, except that this one is variable as opposed to the resistor that we show in here. The symbol is a fixed resistor. It doesn't change. Once there's a value on it, it is fixed at this value. But there's another type of resistor that's called a potentiometer. And this is a variable resistor. On the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, you will see what it looks like. But if you're looking at this and thinking to yourself, but wait a minute, that kind of looks like a volume control, probably with the little knob pulled off of it, right? You'll be quite correct. That's one way a potentiometer may look. Again, there are different packages, different representations as to what it will look like in a piece of electronic equipment. But this is one way it will look. And it's a variable resistor. It's called a potentiometer. It looks like a volume control knob, and it's adjustable as you turn it from left to right. And similarly to the resistor, it has resistance, except that it is variable. And in the middle here, towards the bottom of the screen, is the symbol for a variable resistor or a potentiometer. So compare and contrast the two symbols, very similar, except that you have this little extra line with an arrow, meaning that it is variable. So we have a potentiometer. So these are the two components as we begin talking about electronic components. And that will be it for our theory this evening. And we now move into, before I go into the question in the question pool, now that we have dealt with the potentiometer, I just would like to bring back up our electric circuit and water circuit analogy. And it was a question I think a couple of persons did ask. They said, well, you know, is a switch really a fair comparison for a valve in the water circuit? Because remember, we said a switch is either on or off. It's either closed or open. When it's closed, current flows or the electrons flow. When it's open, there is no flow. But a valve is usually something that could be completely shut off, where no water will flow in the water circuit. When you crack it open a little way, a little bit of water will flow. And when you have it all the way open, full breach, all of the water, maximum flow will occur. And the question with the switch is either all or nothing. It was either closed or open, or on or off. So now that we have learned what a potentiometer is, or a variable resistor, we just put back up this circuit here to show that we could have easily replaced this switch here with a potentiometer to more closely represent in the water circuit a valve, because a valve really is like the potentiometer. You have it shut off completely and then you can open it a little bit, open it a little more until it's fully open. You can do that with a volume control knob or a potentiometer in the circuit. So this is just the same representation of the electric circuit and the water circuit, just to let you know that you can, in this circuit, replace the switch with a potentiometer and it will more closely resemble the analogous water circuit that we've been using to describe the flow of electricity and the idea of circuits. So let us now go to our question pool, and it's really just a few questions that we have to deal with. So let's go. All right. So the first question, again, we will speed through these questions. You should recognize them. We just covered them in the slide deck where we went through the full calculation. So first question, which decibel value most closely represents a power increase from 5 watts to 10 watts? So we did the calculation for this, from 5 watts to 10 watts, increase decibel 3 dB. So again, you can learn the answer, but we have learned how to calculate it. So if in the exam you can't recall, is it 3, is it 5, is it 10, is it 2, and you're confused, if you remember the formula, you can work it out, all right? So it shouldn't just be having to remember what the answer is from 5 to 10, it's 3. But if that's your choice, you can certainly learn the answer and be successful in the exam, right? So let's do the next question. Which decibel value most closely represents a power decrease from 12 watts to 3 watts? Again, we're talking here about decibel value, and we're talking about a power decrease from 12 watts to 3 watts. So again, we're expecting a negative answer or minus answer. And the correct answer in this case is negative 6 dB. We just did the calculation. All right, so these are the actual questions in the question pool. This is what it will look like. Again, bear in mind, in the actual exam, they may reorder the question. What is A, what is B, what is C, and D, right? So don't remember, well, it's the first answer in the list, right? Don't try not to remember. They do reorder them. So which decibel value represents a power increase from 20 watts to 200 watts? That should look very familiar to you. We just did that question. We're looking for decibel value. It's a power increase from 20 to 200 watts. So we are expecting, of course, a positive value. And that correct answer, it's a 10 times increase. So it was 10 dB. All right. Last couple of questions here. 3 more questions, and that will be it for this evening. All right, so remember we said we have now transitioned into the electronic components and circuits section of the course. So this is topic number 2. So first question in the question pool for that section. What electrical component opposes the flow of current in a DC circuit? So, well, you all know that in an electrical circuit, opposition is resistance. So the component of resistance is called a resistor or resistor, right? So that's the correct answer. A resistor opposes current flow. All right, next question. What type of component is often used as an adjustable volume control? Well, we just did that, right? Remember the potentiometer we just talked about? So that's the correct answer. Last question for this evening. What electrical parameter is controlled by a potentiometer? So what are they asking us here? Electrical parameter. So we learned about resistance, we learned about voltage, we learned about current, and so on, right? But they're asking us what electrical parameter is controlled by a potentiometer. And if you think about the potentiometer, it's a variable resistor. So therefore, what it must control is resistance. So that would be it for our question pool this evening. And we go right back to our slide deck. Just a couple of announcements. So of course, during our course, we do share information relevant to amateur radio. And we're seeing that we just got an alert from the Guatemala Amateur Radio Club that they are on alert due to the eruption of Volcan de Fuego, right? So that is in Guatemala. And on the right-hand side, you'll get these slides. You could probably read it. These are the frequencies that they've asked to protect, because these are the frequencies that those amateur radio operators or ham radio operators may use for emergency communications or MCOMs. So this is going on as we speak. Eruption of Volcan de Fuego in Guatemala, and hams are ready and standby to provide communications and emergency assistance, emergency communications. So here are the frequencies and the 40-meter band, the 20-meter band, and of course other frequencies, WinLink and other bands. So this is just to share some relevant and current information in amateur radio. Of course, the reminder, well, not tomorrow, but the following Saturday, Saturday the 13th, we do have a webinar. Hopefully, you'll be able to join us. The link for that webinar is at the bottom here on your screen, and the webinar or the panel discussion is on the role of weather in being disaster ready. So all are invited. Of course, the contact, should you have any questions or any material, do not hesitate to ask. It's not an issue. I prefer that you have the information and material. If you miss something, don't think it's a bother. Just reach out and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. This is my email address, and this phone number on your screen is good for WhatsApp. So please feel free to reach out. So our next session will be next Friday, which is the 12th of May, I believe, at the usual start time, 8:30 p.m. So thank you, everyone. All the best, be safe, and do have a good night.